I'm here in the Presidio National Park in San Francisco doing a follow-up to my underground bases of the Presidio video. This is July 2019 and I'm pretty much at the top of the Presidio area, right up there, called Rob Hill. But I take a lot of people here, I say look around and show me some signs that you see evidence to the underground bases. They almost always miss it because there it is. It's very difficult to see, but that's actually a Jeep road going down to the big bunker city I call the city because it's so large. Here is a foundation for what looks like a guard shack, including, wow, an escape hatch down into the network of passages, large underground buildings, and 3 levels, according to some researchers who have seen the maps. And that Jeep trail leads right over here to this area I call the city. These are some derelict buildings, but it connects to a much larger complex. You see the air pipe up there? Yeah, there it is, all underground city. This is on top of the underground part of the Presidio I call the city because it's so massive. This is all on top of a huge reinforced concrete level that's partly submerged and partly above ground. The above ground part is all man-made, and here you can see 2 air vents. Over there is a couple of chimneys, and this big white building, which has always been cemented and boarded up. No idea what it was used for. Maybe a radio tower or maybe an elevator shaft. Something that accesses the lower underground bases here at the location I call the city, because it is huge. This is all of it. All on top of big bunkers. Really amazing how huge it is. And it connects to others all around the Presidio. We'll go check out a few more that I didn't put in the first video. This is on the north facing side of the city. On the south facing side of the wine cellars, where people can rent space and go into one of the bunkers and store their wine. This side, however, is still in use. You can see with the fresh barbed wire fence, and down there is a new gate with supplies in the shipping rooms, that the outside one looks like it connects into the underground city here on top of Rob Hill, the highest point in the Presidio, with bunkers that are still very much in use and could use as supply depots to get heavy equipment or blocks of supplies in off of those loading docks. This is the biggest and by far the most private home on the whole Presidio base. I imagine it was once home to the commander of the Pacific Fleet. And the interesting thing about this video is it backs right up to the city. So most certainly somewhere in the bowels of that house there will be a passageway into the underground city. I'm sure it's all cemented over for the current residents, unless there's some form of elite that want to get back there, but that is on the north facing side of the city bunker. One great thing about exploring the Presidio is I always amaze myself with what I find. Even though I've lived here for over 20 years in San Francisco, and for 14 of those right on the edge of the Presidio, sometimes I overlook things like that little passageway there. I know about these stone walls. It's incredible the amount of stone and craftsmanship that went into the work to put in all these walls, which seemingly sometimes don't have much of a purpose except for decoration. Like this path, almost unused today. Some tennis courts there that are used, but the tennis club is another derelict building. Not that this has anything to do with the underground bases, although it might, because it does border right up. It is part of Fort Winfred Scott, which we know has a network of underground bases below it. But this looks more like the recreation area. You could film a movie about the end of the world if you knew where to go in the Presidio, because there is so much wild land out here, and coyotes active in this area, trails that network redwood forests, ferns, palm trees, and all kinds of derelict buildings, including some which are underground bases and some which are just empty buildings that have yet to be remodeled by the Presidio Trust, which manages this land. Now here's one of my favorite little curiosities in the Presidio, and it's this bridge, bridging nothing, bridging nowhere. But it was built by the WPA in the 1930s, the Work Project Authority, I think. And it just connects this always been dry valley here in the Presidio from Fort Winfred Scott. There's another one of the Supreme Commander homes. The newer one is up in those trees. But this is such a curious thing, and incredibly well built, although some of it's crumbling. But what's it for? It's pretty unusual to see. This is a Potter plant that has been put on top of what was once the steps going up to a guard tower at Fort Winfred Scott. One of the entrances, well protected, fences all around this before it was a Presidio. Those are all officers' houses on the eastern slope of Robb Hill, where the largest bunker called the City is located. And the Presidio is pretty much a standalone hill, and that's where most of the bunker activity is in the western half. There's another guard station looking out, and there you can see the massive graveyard, the only large graveyard in San Francisco of all the people who have died in the Pacific Wars and the Western Wars, going all the way back to the Civil War era. Really incredible. But this would have been the base within a base, Fort Winfred Scott. On the north central part of the Presidio, see the beachway in the background and some other coastal armament battle stations that have yet to be open to the public. And here are the new tunnels that have been built, facilitating traffic from the Marina neighborhood out to the Golden Gate Bridge, which is clouded in fog today. And on the other side of the road here is another view of the graveyard in the Presidio, San Francisco, California. Here in the northeast part of the Presidio, Chrissy Field down there, more underground roadways that were constructed just a few years ago. So the underground Presidio is still being created. Although that would not connect to Robb Hill, that's the National Cemetery. And on the lower part of the Presidio is the main post, and I've found very little underground bases activity. I think it's mostly in the western part. It's my first time seeing the newly completed bridge over the two tunnels, far southeastern corner of the Presidio. So it's just opened up. What they're doing here is re-landscaping the top of the tunnels. Up there is Fort Winfield Scott, sorry I've been mispronouncing it. In the fog there, this is the main base. And these are the new tunnels that are just being completed. These fences should be down next time I come here, right on the edge of Chrissy Field. Really nice addition to the Presidio. Most of the bunkers are these batteries, these large fortified concrete bunkers that had these big guns on them. But you can see they all have connections to their own isolated, smaller underground bases. What I've been looking into is around Nob Hill here. We know Battery Wagner has a big one that's still used today. That's Fort Winfield Scott. Many batteries up there, including Battery Dynamite and Tell, anti-aircraft guns. This is all underground bases. This is where the main ones are. Near the base within a base, Fort Winfield Scott. And that connects down here to Mountain Lake. And just up the hill here is where the Nike missile silos were located, that shaded area in the middle. This is the center of Fort Winfield Scott in the Presidio, San Francisco. This is the fort within a fort. So this is where all the officers of the entire Pacific Fleet worked out of, with their houses in the background and some storehouses, and the underground bunker, which the city is just behind us, about a quarter mile. And one time a worker told me that some of these main buildings connect to it. So what's changed since I've been here last? They used to have these big, what looked like giant bullets or rocket propellants on these pedestals. They are now gone. This was the Supreme Commander of the Pacific's office, head office. So there would be some passages to the underground bases all around here. Now it's taken over by the World Economic Forum. They took down the shells, trying to make it look like a not so ordinary building from all the rest. But I could tell you, this was it. This was the main office for the entire Pacific realm, the theater, as they call it in military speak. Right here at Fort Winfield Scott, Presidio. This is the approximate location where I met a workman here at the Presidio Trust, and I talked to him for about 10 or 15 minutes, asking him pointed questions about the underground base system that can be seen up here on the top of Rob Hill, the city as I call it. And I was asking if he'd seen any of the chambers or passages below the main base here, Fort Winfield Scott, up to Rob Hill. He confirmed he did, and has been down there and saw passages that went on for as far as the eye can see. And reminded me that there were some videos of kids who have snuck down, gotten into some of the levels with the batteries, and gotten all the way out to some that overlook the Pacific. He says you could look on YouTube and you'd find it. The last time I was here filming the underground Presidio over 2 years ago, these big cement blocks were not on top of that hatch, nor was this fencing and logs over the Nike missile silo. But it does look like they are going to preserve these someday, because they didn't bury them over. They're doing a big natural remediation around here with these artificial sand dunes, because this is how most of western San Francisco looked, sand dunes. But I would imagine this chamber underneath here for the Nike missile silo has these two hatches, maybe others. And this was all an isolated bunker with perhaps a passageway to the other two, which have also not been buried and are just kind of hidden over. So it would be nice to see them do something with these someday, make it a historical site rather than just bury them up. But this is the Nike missile silo, changed since I've been here last, and certainly covered over for what is underground. If you're wondering why it's very difficult to get into the underground Presidio. I'll show you. This is a hatch I just found, and it is partly buried, but it has what looks like a wall added, and was added onto afterwards, but it's not completely gone. They're not burying these over with this remediation of these, recreation of the sand dunes that once encompassed western San Francisco. And here you can see two more, and this is the site of the other two Nike missile silos that I've discovered. The one is just below those black tarps, and I had fully expected to come out here and see these all filled up, because I thought they'd be a hazard and they wouldn't let it stand. But there's one of them right in that gap of hills. They're leaving it for perhaps restoring it someday and offering tours or something like that. That's all I can think of. And the third one I've discovered is right here, and it too is still pretty well preserved with the top metal part. And here you can see the hatch. When I was originally told of this by a contractor in Half Moon Bay, he said, look for the hatch. If you find the hatch, you'll find the Nike missile silos. And here it is. From the Cold War era, a nuclear warhead on a Nike missile that could have landed retaliatory strikes in San Francisco, California. And it looks like the National Park is going to preserve these, as they should. They are a part of the history of the Presidio underground. I'm now at Baker Beach with the iconic Golden Gate Bridge in the background. Up on that ridge top is also part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which includes the Presidio here. And this is the southwestern corner. And a few years ago, a friend of mine told me he got down into a localized underground network here. This one could be it. One of these was they were able to lift it up and get in there. Not encouraging anyone to do that, or this one. But it was originally, when he got in there, only a few years ago, there was a big generator, and there's a big bunker in the woods there in the shade you can see in the distance. He thought it got to the bottom of that, and when he got down to the passageway level, that also connected up here. So this might have been some kind of command headquarters. Actually, I think this was the hatch they got down, because it's got a lock on it, and they were here when there was no lock on it. Somebody just neglected to put it on. But that is a hatch to the localized underground bases here in the southwest corner of the Presidio, with this outbuilding here, which may have connections. There's a chamber down, and some more. Yep. Clearly going down to lower levels. But since we're just above sea level, I don't think this one connected to the city or the larger base system up on Robb Hill. This was probably just a localized command center, but they were able to go to a couple nearby bunkers via the underground chambers. There were some YouTube videos that were made of people climbing through what looked like the city complex, going out some passageways, and then finally popping out at a gunnery station on the cliffs. And it could be these cliffs right here, and it might be that cement area there. It's very difficult to get to. I've seen a couple like that. I'm sure it's covered up by now. In fact, when I talked to the maintenance worker a few years ago, he said that they had remedied the situation, meaning covered it up where the people had gotten in. But here we are at the iconic Golden Gate Bridge. This is the opening out to the Pacific, and on both sides are battlements everywhere to protect the Golden Gate, because if an enemy were to get their fleet in to that bay, that they could control the whole west coast. So there are bunkers and batteries and underground features all over. We're in the Presidio, on the western side, and this is where one or several of the battlements would have looked out to the sea and connected to Battery Dynamite, the great big complex right up there. This is one of the gunnery lookout points at a spot called Battery Crosby, overlooking the Golden Gate. This is World War I era, because it once had what's called disappearing guns right up here on these turrets. They're all gone except for one, and they even give some tours of the lower level underground chambers. Now again, these are localized underground bases. I have no intel if they connect to the larger city complex. They might, because this ground is actually very easy to burrow through, and it would make sense they would have an escape hatch. These were all built for heavy bombardment of these complexes, which never did happen, but they were built in the age before radar. So if an enemy was right at your doorstep, you're not going to know until you see them out there, in which case they're probably firing at you as much as you're firing at them. Fortunately, that never happened, but you can see here clearly multi-levels, underground compartments, and even stovepipes where they would have lived out here for extended periods of time. And then all of them connecting back above ground with jeep roads. This is the one remaining example of the disappearing gun here at Fort Chamberlain, one of the bunkers of the Presidio facing Baker Beach. And one day a month they open up these bunkers for tours, and you can go in and explore around and see how the men live down there, and even explore a couple passageways. Here, the underground localized bunkers that once housed many men living here in the age before radar, manning these, they call them disappearing guns, because after they recoil they pop back down into their original position. You can see us here in Seacliff neighborhood, Land's End, Baker Beach, crashing just out of view. Here at the Disappearing Guns platform with bunkers that can be toured and visited.